The winter wind howled through the mountain pass like a wounded animal, and Darren Gaines knew he was going to die if he didn't find shelter soon. His fingers had gone numb an hour ago, his boots were soaked through, and the fever burning behind his eyes made the snowy landscape shimmer and twist in ways that couldn't be real. He'd been hunting a deer when the blizzard hit, thinking he could make it back to the trading post before the worst of it arrived, but he'd been wrong. So stupidly, fatally wrong, through the white curtain of snow a shape emerged. At first he thought it was a boulder, then perhaps a cave entrance, but as he stumbled closer he realized it was a structure. A cabin, low and sturdy, built into the mountainside itself. Smoke rose from a chimney carved through the stone. His heart surged with desperate hope, and he threw himself against the heavy wooden door, pounding with what little strength remained in his frozen hands. The door swung open so suddenly he nearly fell through it. Strong hands caught him by the shoulders, and he found himself staring up into a face that would have made him recoil in terror if he'd had the energy. Green skin, darker than spring grass and weathered by mountain winds. 2 small tusks jutted from her lower jaw, white against the green. Golden eyes, wide with surprise, stared down at him. An orc woman. "Please," he managed to croak, his voice barely a whisper. "Please." She didn't speak. For a long moment she simply studied him, and he could see the conflict playing across her broad features. Then, with a sound that might have been resignation or disgust, she hauled him inside and kicked the door shut against the storm. The warmth hit him like a physical blow. His legs gave out, but she was already moving, lowering him onto a bench near the hearth. The cabin was small but well-maintained, everything in its place. Herbs hung from the rafters, and the smell of something cooking filled the air. His stomach cramped with hunger he'd been too cold to notice. "You are a fool to be out in such weather," she said, her voice deeper than a human woman's but not harsh. There was a slight accent to her common tongue, a thickness to certain consonants. "Take off those wet things before you lose your fingers." Darren tried to respond, but his teeth were chattering too hard. She made an impatient sound and began pulling off his gloves herself, her movements brisk and efficient. Her hands were large and calloused, warm against his frozen skin. When she saw the state of his fingers, mottled white and red, she hissed something in Orcish that sounded like a curse. "Wait here," she commanded, though he couldn't have moved if he'd wanted to. She disappeared behind a curtain that divided the cabin, returning moments later with blankets and a clay pot. She wrapped him in the blankets first, then began rubbing some kind of salve onto his hands. It burned and stung, but he could feel sensation slowly returning. "The salve will help," she said, not looking at his face. "You are lucky. Another hour and you would have lost these fingers, maybe more." "Thank you," he managed through still chattering teeth. She grunted, neither accepting nor rejecting his gratitude. Once his hands were wrapped, she moved to his boots, unlacing them with practiced efficiency. When she pulled them off, water sloshed out, and she shook her head in what was clearly disgust. "Your feet are nearly as bad. Did you not prepare at all before venturing into the high country?" "I thought I had time," Darren said weakly. "The storm came faster than I expected. The mountain does not care what you expect." She applied more salve to his feet, her touch surprisingly gentle despite her clear annoyance. "The mountain takes what it wants. You should know this." He wanted to defend himself, to explain that he was experienced, that he'd been hunting these mountains for 3 years since he'd left the army, but the warmth and the exhaustion were dragging him down. His eyes kept wanting to close. "Do not sleep yet," she said sharply, noticing. "Not until you are warm through. You have fever, yes," he nodded. He'd been fighting it for 2 days, some illness he'd picked up at the trading post. It had seemed manageable until the cold had sapped every reserve of strength from his body. She stood and moved to the fire, ladling something from a pot that hung over the flames. When she returned, she pressed a wooden bowl into his wrapped hands. "Drink, slowly." The broth was rich and savory, thick with meat and vegetables he couldn't identify. It burned his throat going down, but it was the best thing he'd ever tasted. He sipped it carefully, feeling warmth spread through his chest and belly. She watched him drink, standing with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. She was tall, he realized, taller than him by several inches, with broad shoulders and a solid build that spoke of strength and hard work. She wore simple clothes, a tunic and trousers made of wool and leather, practical and well-made. Her dark hair was pulled back in a thick braid that fell past her shoulders. "What is your name?" she asked abruptly. "Darren Gaines," he said between sips. "I'm from the trading post 2 valleys over." She nodded slowly. "I know this place. You are the hunter who brings them deer and rabbit." He was surprised she knew that. "Yes, do you trade there?" "Sometimes, when I must." Her tone suggested she didn't enjoy it. "They do not like orcs, but they like my furs and herbs well enough." There was bitterness there, barely concealed. Darren had seen the way the other humans at the post treated the few orcs who came to trade. The suspicion, the inflated prices, the way conversation stopped when green skin appeared. He'd never participated in it, but he'd never stopped it either, and the shame of that suddenly sat heavy in his gut. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, as if debating whether to answer. "Krazga," she said finally. "Krazga of the Stormtusk clan. Though I have not seen my clan in 4 winters." There was a story there, he could tell, but before he could ask, his body betrayed him. A violent shiver racked through him, and the bowl nearly slipped from his hands. Krazga caught it, steadying it. "The fever is strong," she said, pressing a hand to his forehead. Her palm was cool against his burning skin. "You need medicine and rest. Finish the broth." He drank the rest obediently, too tired to do anything else. When the bowl was empty, she took it from him and guided him to lie down on the bench, tucking the blankets around him with an efficiency that spoke of practice. "Sleep now," she said. "I will watch the storm and tend the fire. In the morning, if you are better, we will see about getting you on your way." "Thank you," he said again, his eyes already closing. "Truly, you saved my life." She didn't respond, but he thought he felt her hand rest briefly on his shoulder before darkness claimed him. He woke to the sound of cooking and the smell of bread. For a moment, he couldn't remember where he was, and he sat up too quickly, causing the room to spin. Strong hands pressed him back down. "Slowly," Krazga's voice said. "The fever broke in the night, but you are still weak." Darren blinked until his vision cleared. Morning light filtered through the cabin's small windows, revealing what he hadn't been able to see clearly the night before. The space was immaculately organized, with shelves of preserved foods, dried herbs, and various tools and equipment. Furs and hides hung from hooks on the walls, and in the corner he saw a bow and a quiver of arrows that looked well used. Krazga was at the hearth, using a long paddle to remove flatbread from a stone set near the coals. She'd rolled up her sleeves, revealing forearms corded with muscle and marked with scars. She glanced at him, those golden eyes assessing. "How do you feel?" Darren took stock. His head still ached and his body felt wrung out like a rag, but the burning fever had indeed subsided. His hands and feet tingled but no longer felt numb. "Better. Much better, thanks to you." "Good. Then you can eat properly." She placed several pieces of the flatbread on a wooden plate, along with slices of some kind of cured meat and a handful of roasted nuts. She brought it to him along with a cup of water. "Eat, you need strength." He ate slowly, savoring each bite. The bread was nutty and dense, the meat rich and flavorful. "This is excellent," he said sincerely. "You're a good cook." She snorted, a sound somewhere between amusement and disbelief. "It is simple food, nothing special." "It's special when you're starving," he countered, taking another bite. "Believe me, I've had plenty of bad food in my time. This is good." A slight flush darkened the green of her cheeks, so subtle he almost missed it. She turned back to the hearth, busying herself with the fire. "The storm has passed," she said, clearly changing the subject. "But there is much snow. The path down the mountain will be difficult." "How difficult?" Darren asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Too difficult for a man still recovering from fever and frostbite." She didn't look at him. "You would not make it halfway, so I'm trapped here. For a few days, yes, until you are stronger and the snow settles." She finally turned to face him, her expression guarded. "Unless you would prefer to try your luck with the mountain now." He could hear the challenge in her voice, but there was something else too. Uncertainty, maybe, or concern that she was trying to hide. She'd saved his life, taken him in despite the obvious complications of harboring a human in her home, and now she was stuck with him. "I'll stay, if you'll have me," he said carefully. "I don't want to impose, but I'm not fool enough to think I can make it down right now." She nodded, some tension leaving her shoulders. "Good, that is wise." She paused, then added, "You will sleep there," gesturing to the bench he was already on. "I have my bed behind the curtain. There is a necessary out back. Follow the path that has been cleared. Do not wander off that path, or you will sink into drifts taller than you are. Understood? And you will help with what work you can manage," she continued, her tone becoming more businesslike. "I do not keep idlers here. If you are well enough to eat, you are well enough to be useful." Darren nodded, respecting her directness. "Fair enough. What needs doing?" She seemed surprised by his ready agreement. "Finish eating first, then I will show you." Over the next few days, Darren learned the rhythms of Krazga's life. She rose before dawn, stoking the fire and preparing breakfast. She had snares and traps scattered throughout the surrounding area, which she checked daily regardless of weather. She spent hours each day working on furs and hides, scraping and treating them with mixtures of her own devising. She gathered what herbs and roots she could find in winter, dug from beneath the snow with patient determination. She was efficient and focused, wasting no movement or time. At first, Darren could only help with small tasks, sorting herbs, minding the fire, preparing vegetables for stews. His hands were still tender, wrapped in bandages that Krazga changed daily while examining his fingers with a critical eye. But as his strength returned, he took on more. He chopped wood for the fire, hauled water from the nearby spring, helped her drag a frozen deer carcass back to the cabin after she shot it with her bow. They worked mostly in silence, but it was a comfortable silence, not hostile. When they did speak, it was practical. "Pass me that knife." "The stew needs more salt." "Watch the wind, it is shifting east." But occasionally, in the evenings, as they sat by the fire after the work was done, the conversation would drift to other things. "How long have you lived here?" Darren asked one night, watching her hands work a piece of leather with practiced skill. 4 years, she said without looking up. "Since I left the clan." "Why did you leave?" Her hands stilled for a moment, then resumed their work. "Because I would not do what they demanded of me." He waited, sensing there was more, but she didn't elaborate. Instead, she asked, "Why did you leave the army?" He was surprised she knew he'd been a soldier. "How did you know that? The way you move. The way you look at the land, always watching. And the scars." She gestured to his forearm, where a long white line disappeared beneath his sleeve. "That is from a sword, not a hunting accident." Darren ran his thumb over the scar through the fabric. I served for 8 years in the border campaigns. I left because I was tired of killing. Most soldiers enjoy killing, she observed, her tone neutral. Some do. I didn't. He stared into the fire, remembering things he'd rather forget. Not orcs, not anyone. I just wanted to be left alone to live quietly, so when my term was up, I came here. To the mountains where you knew orcs lived, she said, and there was something sharp in her voice. Did you think to hunt us as you hunt the deer? No, he said firmly, meeting her eyes. I'm a hunter, not a soldier anymore. I kill for food and furs, not for sport or hate. And I've never hunted orcs. Never would. She studied him for a long moment, those golden eyes searching his face for lies. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she nodded and returned to her work. Your people killed many of mine in those campaigns, she said quietly. Entire villages burned, children put to the sword. I know. The weight of it sat on his chest like a stone. I saw things that haunt me, things I couldn't stop. I'm sorry. Why, you did not burn my village, didn't I? He looked at his hands, clean now but stained in memory. I wore the same uniform, followed the same orders. Maybe I didn't light the torches, but I was part of the machine that did. Krazga was quiet for a moment. At least you feel shame, she said finally. That is more than most of your kind manage. They fell silent again, but something had shifted between them. A small bridge built over a chasm of history and pain. The next morning, Darren woke to find Krazga moving around the cabin with unusual energy. She'd already prepared breakfast and was packing supplies into a leather satchel. I must check the far traps today, she said when she noticed he was awake. The storm will have covered them, and if there are animals caught, they need tending. It is half a day's walk there and back. I'll come with you, Darren offered, sitting up. She shook her head. You are not strong enough for that distance in deep snow. I'm stronger than I was, and if something happens to you out there alone, no one would know. He stood, testing his legs. The weakness had faded considerably. I can make it. She looked skeptical, but after a moment she nodded. Very well, but we leave immediately, and if you slow us down, I will leave you behind. Understood. Understood. The journey was brutal. The snow was often waist deep, and even following Krazga's broken trail was exhausting. She moved through the drifts with the steady determination of someone accustomed to harsh conditions, never complaining, never slowing. Darren pushed himself to keep up, refusing to be the weak link. His legs burned, his lungs ached in the thin mountain air, but he kept going. They found 3 of her traps had been triggered. 2 held rabbits, mercifully dead, frozen in the night. The 3rd held something else. It was a fox, russet fur stark against the white snow, caught by its leg in the snare. It was alive but weak, watching them approach with terrified eyes. Krazga knelt beside it, examining the trap. The leg is broken, she said quietly. It cannot heal. Darren knew what came next. It was mercy, but that didn't make it easy. He watched as Krazga drew her knife, speaking soft words in Orcish. She was quick and efficient, ending the fox's suffering with a single precise cut. She stayed kneeling for a moment after, her hand resting on the animal's still flank, and he heard her murmur something that sounded like a prayer or blessing. Wasteful death, she said as she stood, carefully freeing the fox from the trap. I do not like traps for this reason. The bow is cleaner, but in winter the bow does not hunt while I sleep. You honored it, Darren said. That matters. She glanced at him, surprise flickering across her face. Your people do not usually think orcs capable of honor. Then my people are idiots. A startled laugh escaped her, short and sharp. It transformed her face, softening the hard lines, and for a moment he saw past the walls she kept raised. She was beautiful, he realized with a start. Not in the delicate way of human women, but in a way that was entirely her own, strong and fierce and real. She caught him staring and looked away quickly, busying herself with resetting the trap. "We should move on. There are 2 more to check." The walk back was slower, burdened with the game they'd collected. The sun was setting by the time they reached the cabin, painting the snow gold and pink. Krazga had been quiet for most of the return journey, but as they approached the door, she spoke. "You did well today. You are stronger than you look." It was simple praise, plainly spoken, but it warmed him more than the fire waiting inside. That evening, as he helped her prepare the rabbits for cooking, Darren found himself watching her hands. They were capable hands, scarred and strong, but they moved with care and precision. She wasted nothing, using every part of the animal, setting aside what would be used for food and what would be used for other purposes. "Who taught you all this?" he asked. "The trapping, the tanning, the healing." "My mother taught me the healing and herb craft," Krazga said. "My father taught me to hunt and trap. The rest I learned myself from necessity." "Your clan didn't teach you," her jaw tightened. "The clan taught me many things, how to fight, how to raid, how to hate." She set down her knife with more force than necessary. "They taught me that humans were vermin to be exterminated, that mercy was weakness, that an orc woman's duty was to bear strong sons for the clan's warriors and ask no questions. But you didn't believe them. I tried to." She picked up the knife again, resuming her work with controlled movements. "For many years I tried. I went on raids, I killed humans, I did what was expected." She paused, staring at something he couldn't see. "Then we attacked a farmstead. A family lived there. A man, a woman, 3 children. The warriors killed the parents quickly, but the children—" She swallowed hard. "The clan leader said to kill them, that human spawn would grow into human soldiers, but they were so small, crying for their mother, and I could not." Darren's chest ached. He could picture it too clearly. "What did you do?" "I hid them. Told the others I had already killed them and left the bodies for the carrion birds. Then I returned after dark and led them to the nearest human settlement." She finally looked at him, her eyes fierce and pained. "They ran from me, screaming." The youngest one wet himself in fear, but they lived. "And when my clan discovered what I had done, they cast me out, said I was weak, a traitor to orcish blood." "You saved children's lives," Darren said quietly. "That's not weakness, that's courage. My clan did not see it that way." She returned to her work, her movements mechanical. "So I came here, to the high places where neither orc nor human would follow, and I have been alone since." Alone. The word hung in the air between them. 4 years alone in this isolated cabin, seeing other souls only on rare trips to trade. 4 years with no one to talk to, no one to share the long winter nights with. The loneliness of it struck him like a blow. "I'm sorry," he said, "for what they did to you, for what my kind did to make your kind hate us, for all of it." She shook her head. "You apologize too much. You are not responsible for all the evil in the world. Maybe not. But I can still be sorry it exists." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and something passed between them, an understanding, a recognition. They were both exiles in their own ways, both running from violence, both seeking something quieter and truer. "The stew will be good tonight," she said finally, breaking the moment, "with the fresh meat. I look forward to it." They cooked together in companionable silence, and when they ate, the food tasted richer than ever before. The days began to blend together in a way that surprised Darren. He'd expected to chafe at the confinement, to grow anxious to return to his own cabin and his own life. But instead, he found a strange contentment in the routine they'd established. Each morning brought new tasks, and he threw himself into them with an enthusiasm he hadn't felt in years. He repaired a section of roof where snow had damaged the thatch. He reinforced the door against the wind. He organized her storage, building new shelves to better utilize the space. Krazga watched these efforts with what he thought might be approval, though she rarely said so directly. "You are good with your hands," she observed one afternoon as he fitted new hinges to a cabinet door. "You make careful work." "My father was a carpenter," Darren explained, testing the door's swing. "Before I joined the army, I worked with him for years." "Why did you join then? If you had a trade—" He was quiet for a moment, remembering. "Conscription. The army needed bodies for the campaigns. They came through our town and took every able man between 16 and 30. My father was too old, so they took me instead." "And after? You could have returned to carpentry." "I thought about it, but my father died while I was gone. There was nothing to go back to." He shrugged, trying to keep his voice even. "So I came here instead." Krazga nodded slowly. "War takes everything from everyone. This is its nature." "Yes," he agreed quietly. "Yes, it is." That night, Krazga did something she hadn't done before. She brought out a clay jug from a hidden shelf and poured 2 cups of something that smelled strong and herbal. "Mead," she said, handing him one. "I make it from mountain honey and herbs. It helps with the cold in the dark." They sat by the fire, sipping the mead. It was sweet and warming with an pleasant aftertaste. Darren felt the tension of the day begin to melt from his shoulders. "Tell me about the trading post," Krazga said suddenly. "The people there. What are they like?" It was the first time she'd asked him about anything beyond immediate practicalities. Darren considered the question carefully. "Mixed," he said finally. "There's Marcus, who runs the post. He's fair enough in his dealings, doesn't cheat anyone outright. His wife Sarah does the cooking for the attached inn. She's kind, always has a smile. Then there's Dutch, the blacksmith. He's good at his work but has a mean streak when he drinks. And there's a handful of trappers and hunters like me who come and go." "And they all hate orcs," Krazga stated flatly. "Most of them are wary, yes. Some are outright hostile, Dutch especially. He lost family in the campaigns." Darren took another sip of mead. "But not everyone. Sarah always treats the orc traders with respect. And Marcus, like I said, he's fair in business at least." "Fair in business," Krazga repeated with a bitter edge. "But not in humanity." "No," Darren admitted. "Not in humanity." They sat in silence for a while, watching the fire. Finally, Krazga spoke again, her voice softer than before. "Do you have anyone? A woman waiting for you at your cabin?" The question caught him off guard. "No, no one. I live alone. Hunt alone. I prefer it that way." "Why?" He considered lying, giving some easy answer about independence or freedom. But the mead had loosened his tongue, and her honesty deserved honesty in return. "Because it's easier to be alone than to care about someone and lose them," he said. "I lost my father. I lost comrades in the war, people I thought would always be there. It hurt too much. So I stopped letting anyone get close." Krazga nodded slowly. "I understand this feeling." "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Coming up here alone?" "Sometimes," she admitted. "When the winters are long and the silence feels too heavy. When I wake from dreams of the clan, even though they cast me out." She turned her cup in her hands, studying the dark liquid. "But then I remember why I left. I remember those children's faces, and I know I made the right choice even if it is a lonely one." "For what it's worth," Darren said, "I think you made the right choice too." She met his eyes, and in the firelight her golden gaze seemed to glow. "Thank you," she said simply. They finished their mead in comfortable silence, and when Darren lay down to sleep that night, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. A sense of belonging, of being understood. It was fragile and new, but it was there, warming him from the inside like the mead. Over the next several days, the snow began to settle and compact, and Darren knew his time in Krazga's cabin was drawing to a close. His hands had healed completely. leaving only faint marks where the frostbite had been worst. His strength had fully returned. There was no reason to stay longer, and yet he found himself inventing excuses. One more project to complete. One more trap line to check. One more evening by the fire. Krazga didn't call him on it, which made him wonder if perhaps she was making excuses too. They were preparing dinner together one evening when the subject finally came up. Darren was cutting vegetables while Krazga tended a large pot over the fire. She'd been unusually quiet all day, and he'd caught her watching him several times with an expression he couldn't read. "The path will be clear enough tomorrow," she said abruptly, not looking at him. "You can return to the trading post, to your cabin." "Yes," Darren agreed, though the word felt like ash in his mouth. "I suppose I can. You have stayed longer than necessary." It wasn't quite an accusation, but there was a question underneath it. "I wanted to make sure you had enough firewood for the rest of winter," he said, which was true but not the whole truth. "And the roof needed those repairs. These things are done now." "Yes." Krazga stirred the pot with more force than necessary. "So you will leave?" "You want me to?" The question came out before he could stop it, raw and honest. She went very still. For a long moment, the only sound was the crackle of the fire. Then she set down her spoon and turned to face him. "It does not matter what I want," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "You have your own life, your own home. You cannot stay here forever." "Why not?" The question hung in the air between them. Krazga's eyes widened slightly, and a dozen emotions flickered across her face too quickly to name. "Because," she said, but didn't finish the sentence. Darren set down his knife and stepped closer. His heart was pounding, and he knew he was about to step off a cliff, but he couldn't stop himself. "I don't want to leave," he said quietly. "These past weeks, working with you, talking with you, just being here, I've been happier than I've been in years, and I think maybe you feel it too. You do not know what you are saying," but her voice shook slightly. "I know exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying that you're the most remarkable person I've ever met. I'm saying that I look forward to waking up every morning because I know I'll see you. I'm saying that the thought of going back to my empty cabin and my empty life makes me feel sick inside." "I am an orc," she said, as if that explained everything. "I know. Your people hate my people, I know. If anyone knew you had stayed here with me, they would call you a traitor. They would spit on you, drive you out." "I know," he said again, and took another step closer. "And I don't care." She looked at him with something like desperation. "You should care. Your life would be ruined." "My life was already ruined. I was just going through the motions, trying to forget. But here, with you, I feel alive again. I feel like maybe there's a point to it all." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. It was warm and strong in his, and she didn't pull back. "I'm not asking you to love me. I know it's too soon for that. But let me stay. Let me be useful. Let me see where this goes." Krazga stared at their joined hands, then up at his face. Her eyes were bright, and he realized with shock that she was fighting back tears. "You are a fool," she whispered, "probably. This cannot end well. Maybe not, but I'd rather have something real that ends badly than nothing at all." A sound escaped her, half laugh and half sob. "What did I do to deserve this? I save one frozen human from the snow, and he decides to upend my entire life." "Is that a yes?" Darren asked, hardly daring to hope. She squeezed his hand hard enough that it almost hurt. "You will help with all the work. You will carry your share and more. You will not complain about the cold or the isolation or the fact that we will see no other souls for months at a time. I promise. And if you change your mind, if you wake one morning and realize what a mistake this is, you will tell me honestly. No lies, no false comfort. I promise that too." She searched his face one more time, looking for doubt or deception. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly. "Then you may stay," she said. "For now, we will see how the winter goes." Relief flooded through him so intensely he felt dizzy. Without thinking, he pulled her into an embrace, wrapping his arms around her solid warmth. She stiffened for a moment in surprise. Then slowly, hesitantly, her arms came up to return the embrace. They stood there by the fire, holding each other, and Darren felt something inside him that had been clenched tight for years finally begin to loosen. "The stew is going to burn," Krazga said after a long moment, but she didn't pull away. "Let it burn," Darren replied, and felt her laugh against his chest, a real laugh, warm and genuine and full of surprised joy. That night marked a subtle shift in their dynamic. The walls Krazga had maintained, the careful distance, began to lower. Not all at once, but in small increments. She smiled more readily. She shared stories from her childhood with the clan, the good memories along with the bad. She asked him questions about his life, his family, his dreams for the future. And Darren learned things about her that made him marvel. She could identify hundreds of different plants and their uses. She knew the stars like old friends and could navigate by them even on the darkest nights. She had taught herself to read common by painstakingly copying letters from old trade documents, practicing in secret, because the clan elders said learning human tongue was beneath orcs. She carved small figures from wood in the evenings, animals and birds so lifelike they seemed ready to leap from her hands. "These are beautiful," Darren said one night, examining a wooden hawk she'd just completed. "You could sell these at the trading post for good money." She shook her head. "They are just something to occupy my hands. They're art, real art." The flush he'd noticed before colored her cheeks again. "Orcs do not make art, we make weapons and armor, practical things." "Then I guess it's a good thing you're not really part of that clan anymore," he said gently. "You can make whatever you want." She took the hawk from his hands, running her thumb over its carved wings. "Perhaps," she said quietly, "perhaps I can." As the weeks passed, Darren settled fully into the rhythm of life in the high mountains. He learned to read the weather signs that Krazga watched for. He learned which herbs to gather and how to prepare them. He practiced with her bow until he could hit a target 9 times out of 10. And slowly, carefully, they learned each other. He learned that she sang sometimes while working, low, wordless melodies in a minor key that made his chest ache. He learned that she had nightmares occasionally and would wake gasping, reaching for weapons that weren't there. He learned that her favorite time of day was early morning, when the world was fresh and new, and anything seemed possible. She learned that he was patient beyond measure, willing to repeat attempts at a difficult task until he got it right. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor that could make her laugh at unexpected moments. She learned that he sometimes stood at the window, staring out at the mountains, with an expression of such profound peace that it made her chest tighten. They learned to anticipate each other's needs. He would have the fire stoked before she rose on cold mornings. She would have his favorite tea prepared before he asked for it. They developed a shorthand of gestures and glances that required no words, and slowly, inevitably, they fell in love. It wasn't a dramatic revelation. There was no single moment of realization. Instead, it grew like the spring flowers beneath the snow, roots taking hold in the dark before breaking into sudden bloom. Darren couldn't point to when his affection turned to love, only that one day he looked at Krazga checking her snares, her breath misting in the cold air, and thought, "I love her," with such certainty that it felt like a fundamental truth of the universe. He didn't say it. Not yet. It felt too soon, too presumptuous. But it colored everything he did, every look, every touch, every word. Krazga, for her part, was fighting a similar battle. She told herself at first that she was simply grateful for the company, that it was nice to have help with the work, that she enjoyed conversation after so long alone, all of which was true, but it didn't explain why her pulse quickened when he smiled at her. It didn't explain why she found herself watching him sleep sometimes, memorizing the lines of his face. It didn't explain the fierce protectiveness that rose in her chest at the thought of anything harming him. She'd never expected to feel this way about anyone, least of all a human. Her clan had taught her that humans were enemies, incapable of honor or decency. But Darren was kind and thoughtful and strong in ways that had nothing to do with physical might. He treated her not as a monster or a curiosity, but as a person, an equal, and that was more intoxicating than any mead. The first time they kissed was during a snowstorm, nearly 3 months after Darren had first stumbled to her door. They'd spent the day inside, as the wind howled and snow battered the windows. Darren had been repairing a harness while Krazga ground herbs with mortar and pestle. The work was mindless, leaving room for conversation. "What do you miss most about your old life?" Darren asked. Krazga considered the question. "My mother," she said finally. "She was kind for an orc, gentle with me when the others were not watching. She died when I was 15 winters old, and I still miss her voice. What would she think of me, of this? She would have liked you, I think." Krazga smiled slightly. "She always said that strength was not just in the arm, but in the heart. You have that kind of strength." "I hope I'm worthy of that assessment." "You are." The certainty in her voice surprised them both. Later, as they prepared for bed, Krazga stumbled over an uneven board. Darren caught her automatically, his hand steadying her shoulders. They froze like that, close enough that he could see the flecks of amber in her golden eyes, close enough that her breath warmed his face. "Darren," she said, and his name on her lips sounded like a prayer. "Yes, I want." She hesitated, then seemed to gather her courage. "I want to kiss you." "Is that foolish?" "No," he said, his heart hammering. "No, it's not foolish. I want that too." She leaned in slowly, giving him every chance to pull away. When their lips met, it was gentle and uncertain, a question being asked and answered. Her tusks were smooth against his skin, exotic but not unpleasant. She tasted like the herbs she'd been grinding, sweet and earthy. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Krazga's eyes were wide and wondering. "That was my first kiss," she admitted quietly. "Mine was not," Darren said with equal honesty, "but it was the best one." She laughed, that beautiful genuine laugh, and kissed him again, more confident this time. And Darren felt the last piece of his heart click into place. After that night, they were no longer two people sharing a space, but partners in truth. They still maintained separate sleeping areas, both aware that rushing physical intimacy would be a mistake, but the emotional intimacy deepened daily. They held hands while walking the trap lines. They sat close by the fire, her head on his shoulder or his arm around her waist. They kissed good night and good morning, small tender gestures that anchored them both. Winter gradually loosened its grip on the mountains. The snows became less frequent, the days grew longer, and the first brave shoots of green began to push through the frozen ground. Darren had been living with Krazga for 4 months, and the thought of leaving, of returning to his isolated existence, was unthinkable now. But the thaw brought a complication they'd both been dreading. Darren's supplies from his cabin were running low. He needed to make a trip to the trading post for flour, salt, and other staples. And that meant facing the human world again, the world that would not understand or accept what he'd found here. "I will come with you," Krazga said when they discussed the upcoming trip. "You don't have to. I know it's not pleasant for you there. I have furs to trade, and we need the supplies." Besides, she added with a slight smile, I do not trust you to choose good herbs on your own. You would come back with half-dried nonsense. Darren laughed. Fair point. But Krazga, we need to be careful. If they suspect that we are together, that I've been living with you, they will call you race traitor and me a corrupting savage. Her voice was flat. I know this, but I will not hide from them. I have as much right to trade as anyone. I know you do. I just don't want to make things harder for you. She cupped his face in her hand, her touch tender. You make everything easier, not harder. We will face whatever comes together. Yes, yes, he agreed and kissed her palm. They set out for the trading post 3 days later, packs loaded with Krazga's furs and what little Darren had left from his own trapping. The journey took the better part of a day, following deer trails and old paths down from the high country. As they descended, Darren felt his anxiety growing. How would he act? What would he say? How could he stand there and pretend that Krazga was just another trader when she was everything to him? They reached the post in late afternoon. It was a sprawling structure, part warehouse, part inn, part general store, built at the confluence of two valleys where multiple trade routes met. A handful of other buildings clustered nearby, a blacksmith's forge, a stable, a small chapel. Smoke rose from chimneys, and Darren could hear voices and the clang of metal on metal from the forge. Several people were visible in the yard. Marcus, the proprietor, was talking with a trapper Darren recognized. Sarah was hanging laundry. And Dutch, the blacksmith, was working at his anvil, his massive arms swinging his hammer in steady rhythm. As Darren and Krazga approached, the conversations died. Heads turned. Eyes tracked them, moving from Darren to Krazga and back again with obvious suspicion. Marcus was the first to speak. Darren Gaines, thought you'd frozen to death up in the high country. Haven't seen you since before that big blizzard in early winter. I nearly did freeze, Darren said evenly. Would have if Krazga here hadn't taken me in and nursed me back to health. More eyes swung to Krazga, who stood tall and impassive, her pack of furs over her shoulder. Marcus's gaze sharpened. That's so. He looked between them again, and Darren could almost see him doing calculations. Well, lucky for you then. Very lucky, Darren agreed. Dutch had stopped his hammering and walked over, his expression dark. What's wrong with you, Gaines? You gone soft in the head, accepting charity from a greenskin. It wasn't charity, Darren said, keeping his voice level with effort. I would have died without her help. I owe her my life. You don't owe nothing to an orc, Dutch spat. They killed my brother in the campaigns, burned my family farm, their animals, every last one of them. Darren felt Krazga tense beside him, but she didn't speak. He wanted to plant his fist in Dutch's face, wanted to defend her honor, but he knew that would only make things worse. I'm sorry about your brother, he said instead. War is hell and it takes from everyone, but Krazga didn't kill him. She wasn't even part of those raids. She's a healer and a trapper, same as me. Once an orc, always an orc, Dutch growled, but Marcus stepped between them. That's enough, Dutch. The orc woman wants to trade. She's got the same right as anyone, long as her goods are fair and her coin is good. He turned to Krazga. Let's see what you've got. They conducted business in tense silence. Krazga laid out her furs, which were of exceptional quality as always. Marcus examined them with a critical eye, but even he couldn't find fault. They negotiated prices with the same careful formality as always, though Darren noticed Marcus seemed less inclined to haggle than he might have with a human trader. While they traded, Sarah approached Darren quietly. Is it true that you've been staying with her all winter? Yes, Darren said simply. There was no point in lying. Sarah studied his face for a long moment. You look different, she said finally. Happier maybe, less haunted. The observation surprised him. I am happier. She must be quite a woman to put that look in your eyes. Sarah smiled slightly. People are going to talk, you know. Already are from the look of things. Let them talk. It'll be more than talk if you're not careful. There's rules about this sort of thing, even if they're not written down. I know. Darren met her eyes. But some things are worth the risk. Sarah nodded slowly. Well, for what it's worth, she treated you right when you needed it. That counts for something in my book. She patted his arm and moved away before he could respond. The trading concluded. Krazga took her payment in coin and goods, salt, flour, sugar, and a few other supplies they needed. Marcus recorded everything in his ledger with meticulous care, his expression neutral but his eyes watchful. You planning to head back up to the high country now? Marcus asked as they prepared to leave. Eventually, Darren said carefully. We have some other stops to make first. Right? Well, watch yourself out there. Spring brings out the predators. It wasn't clear if Marcus meant animal predators or human ones. As they left the trading post, Darren could feel eyes on their backs. Low conversation started up behind them, words too quiet to hear but tone unmistakable. They walked in silence until they were well out of sight, following the path toward where Darren's cabin lay. That went about as well as could be expected, Darren said finally. They hate me, Krazga said flatly. And now they suspect you are sympathetic to orcs. You have damaged your standing with them. I don't care about my standing with them. You should. They are your people, your community. You need them. I need you more. He stopped walking and turned to face her. Krazga, I meant what I said before. I don't care what they think. You're worth more to me than their approval ever could be. Her eyes searched his face. You may regret that choice someday. I won't. I promise you I won't. She touched his face gently, and he saw the emotion in her eyes that she was trying to hide. You are either the bravest man I have ever met or the most foolish. Can't I be both? That surprised a laugh from her, and the tension broke. They continued walking, and Darren felt a weight lift from his shoulders. They'd faced the human world together, and they'd survived. Whatever came next, they would face that together too. They reached Darren's cabin as the sun was setting. It was smaller than Krazga's, and after months away, it smelled stale and unused. But it was structurally sound, and the supplies he'd left behind were still there, undisturbed. This is where you lived before, Krazga said, looking around at the sparse furnishings. A single chair, a narrow bed, a table and a few shelves. It is very empty. I wasn't really living, Darren said quietly, just existing. There's a difference. She nodded, understanding. What will you do with this place now? It was a good question. He couldn't maintain two homes, not practically. And the truth was, he didn't want to. His home was with Krazga now, wherever she was. I'll take what I need and leave the rest, he decided. Maybe some other lonely soul will find it and have better luck here than I did. They spent the night there, Darren and Krazga sharing the narrow bed out of necessity. It was the first time they'd slept in the same space, and Darren was acutely aware of her warmth beside him, the steady rhythm of her breathing. They didn't make love, both still cautious about that step, but they held each other close, and that was enough. In the morning, Darren packed what personal items mattered to him. His father's tools, some clothing, a few books. He left a note for anyone who might find the place, saying it was free for use by any who needed shelter. Then he and Krazga began the journey back to her cabin, back to the high country that had become their home. As they climbed higher into the mountains, Darren felt something settle inside him. This was right. This was where he belonged. Not in isolation, nursing old wounds, but here with Krazga, building something new. They were halfway home when they encountered the hunters. There were 3 of them, rough-looking men with bows and spears, clearly working a trap line in the foothills. They looked up as Darren and Krazga approached, and their expressions shifted from curiosity to hostility the moment they saw green skin. "Well now," one of them said, a tall man with a scarred face. "What do we have here? A human traveling with an orc. That's a strange sight." "We're just passing through," Darren said evenly, his hand moving instinctively toward the knife at his belt. "No trouble. No trouble," the tall man laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Boy, you are the definition of trouble. What kind of man travels with a greenskin? What kind of race traitor are you? The kind who minds his own business and expects others to do the same," Darren replied, his voice hardening. "Now step aside." The three hunters moved to block the path instead. Darren felt Krazga tense beside him, saw her shift her weight in a way he'd learned meant she was preparing for violence. "See, here's the thing," the tall hunter continued. "We don't like orcs in these parts. Bad enough they come to the trading post, acting like they're people. But when we see a human treating one like it's his equal, well, that's a problem." "That's your problem, not mine," Darren said. "Last chance. Move. Or what? You'll sick your orc bitch on us." The words were barely out of the hunter's mouth when Krazga moved. She didn't reach for a weapon or make a threatening gesture. She simply stepped forward, drawing herself to her full height, and met the hunter's eyes with a gaze like molten gold. "I am Krazga of the Stormtusk clan," she said, her voice carrying a weight of authority that made all three hunters flinch. "I have killed more men than you have lived years. I have torn apart war parties and walked through blood up to my knees, but I do not want to kill you today. I want only to pass in peace, so I will give you the same choice your companion gave us. Move, or learn why orcs are feared." The silence that followed was absolute. The tall hunter's bravado had evaporated, replaced by very real fear. He looked into Krazga's eyes and saw truth there. Saw violence held barely in check. Saw death waiting patiently for an excuse. "We don't want trouble either," he said, and this time his voice shook slightly. He and his companions stepped off the path, giving them a wide berth. Darren and Krazga walked past them without another word. Darren could feel the hunters' eyes on their backs, but no one moved or spoke until they were well out of sight. When they were alone again, Darren let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. That was intense. "They were cowards," Krazga said dismissively. "Big words when they thought us weak, no words when strength answered. You could have killed them." "Yes, but killing is easy, living after killing is hard." She glanced at him. "I have had enough killing in my life. I do not need more." Darren reached for her hand, twining their fingers together. "Thank you, for not killing them, for choosing peace." "I choose you," she said simply, "and you choose peace, so I choose peace too." They walked hand in hand the rest of the way home. The encounter with the hunters weighed on Darren's mind over the following days. It had made clear what he'd already suspected. Their relationship, if it became public knowledge, would bring them both trouble. But more than that, it had shown him something else. Krazga was strong in ways he could barely comprehend. She could have torn those hunters apart without breaking a sweat. But she'd chosen restraint, chosen compassion, and she'd done it for him. He found himself thinking about their future, what it might look like. They couldn't hide in the mountains forever. Eventually, supplies would run low. Eventually, they'd need to interact with the outside world again, and when they did, they'd face judgment and hostility. Was it fair to ask Krazga to endure that? Was it fair to her to bind her to a future of being outcast and scorned? These thoughts troubled him enough that Krazga noticed. "You are quiet today," she observed as they worked together to repair a fence around her small garden plot. "Something troubles you." "I'm worried," he admitted. "About what our life will look like. About whether I'm being selfish, asking you to be with me when it brings you so much trouble." Krazga set down her hammer and turned to face him fully. You did not ask me for anything. I chose you, remember? I chose to let you stay. I chose to care for you. I chose to love you. It was the first time either of them had used that word aloud. It hung in the air between them, crystalline and perfect. You love me? Darren asked, his voice barely a whisper. Of course I love you, you foolish man. Her voice was exasperated but tender. Did you think I kiss everyone who chops wood for me? Did you think I share my home and my food and my life with just anyone? I love you too, he said, the words tumbling out. I've wanted to tell you for weeks, but I was afraid it was too soon, or that I'd scare you away, or that you couldn't possibly feel the same way about someone like me. Someone like you, she repeated with a shake of her head. Darren Gaines, you are kind and brave and honest. You are strong without being cruel. You choose peace without being weak. You make me laugh. You make me feel safe. You make me believe that maybe there is a place in this world for an outcast orc and a broken soldier to find happiness together. Why would I not love someone like you? He crossed the distance between them and kissed her, pouring everything he felt into it. She responded with equal fervor, her arms coming around him, holding him tight. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. I want to build a real life with you, Darren said. Not just surviving together, but building, making plans, creating something that lasts. What kind of life? I don't know exactly, but something better than hiding, something that matters. He took her hands in his. Krazga, what if we expanded the cabin, made it bigger, more comfortable? What if we built something that could be a real home for both of us? And maybe someday, if we wanted, for others too, she understood what he was implying. A family, children, a future. Her eyes widened and he saw hope and fear warring in her expression. That is a dream, she said quietly. A beautiful dream, but dreams break easily in the hard world. Then we'll build something strong enough to withstand the world, Darren insisted. Together, we'll make it work because we're both stubborn enough not to give up. A slow smile spread across her face. You are stubborn, this is true. Perhaps stubborn enough to do the impossible. Is that a yes? It is a yes to trying, she said. To building, to seeing what we can create together. But Darren, you must understand, if we do this, if we truly commit to building a life together, there is no going back. The human world will reject you completely. You will be mine and I will be yours, and there will be no middle ground. I don't want middle ground, he said fiercely. I want you. Only you. Forever if you'll have me. Forever is a long time. Not long enough, he said and kissed her again. They spent the rest of that spring planning and building. Darren used his carpentry skills to expand the cabin, adding another room that would serve as a proper bedroom. They built a larger hearth with a better chimney. They constructed additional storage and improved the garden plot, planning for a larger harvest come summer. Every nail driven and every stone placed felt like a promise, a commitment to their shared future. As they worked, they talked about everything. Their hopes, their fears, their dreams. Krazga told him stories of orc culture, the beautiful parts that she missed, the epic songs that chronicled clan history, the festivals celebrating the seasons, the deep bonds of family and honor that, at their best, held orc society together. Darren listened and learned, treasuring these glimpses into a world he'd once thought of as nothing but savage. In turn, he told her about human customs that he'd grown up with. Harvest festivals and winter celebrations. The tradition of hand fasting that marked marriage in rural communities. The way his mother had taught him to bake bread, and his father had taught him to read. Krazga absorbed it all, asking questions, drawing connections between their cultures. We are not so different, humans and orcs, she said one evening as they rested after a long day of work. We want the same things: family, safety, purpose. It is only fear and old hatreds that divide us. Maybe someday that will change, Darren said. Maybe if enough people see that we can live together in peace, the hatred will fade. That is a larger dream than I can imagine, Krazga said. But I hope you are right. Summer arrived in full, and with it came a transformation of the mountainside. Wildflowers bloomed in impossible colors. The streams ran clear and cold with snowmelt. Game was plentiful, and their stores filled with smoked meat and preserved foods. The work was hard but satisfying, and Darren had never been happier. One evening in midsummer, as the sun set in streaks of gold and crimson, Darren took Krazga's hand and led her to a spot he'd prepared. It was a small clearing not far from the cabin, with a view of the valley below. He'd planted wildflowers there and placed smooth stones in a circle. "What is this?" Krazga asked, looking around in surprise. In human tradition, when two people want to commit their lives to each other, they participate in a ceremony called a wedding, Darren said, his heart pounding. "I know we can't have that, not really. No priest would marry us and no community would celebrate with us, but I wanted to create something just for us. A place and a moment where we could make our promises to each other." Krazga's eyes were very bright. "What kind of promises?" "The forever kind." He reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 rings he'd carved from wood over the past weeks. They were simple but carefully crafted, inlaid with small stones he'd found in the stream. "Krazga of the Stormtusk clan, you are the strongest, kindest, most remarkable person I have ever known. You saved my life, and then you gave me a reason to live it. I want to spend every day I have left making you happy, making you laugh, making you feel as loved as you deserve to feel. Will you marry me?" For a long moment, she simply stared at him, tears streaming down her face. Then she pulled him into a fierce embrace, nearly knocking him over. "Yes," she said against his shoulder. "Yes, you foolish, wonderful man. Yes." He slipped one of the rings onto her finger and she slipped the other onto his. They stood there in the clearing as the sun set, holding each other, and Darren felt a peace and rightness that he'd never experienced before. This was what he'd been searching for his entire life. Not glory or adventure, but this: connection, love, home. "In orc tradition," Krazga said quietly, "when two wish to bond, they speak their promises before the ancestors and the spirits of the land. They pledge their strength to each other, their protection, their loyalty until death claims them." "Then let's do that too," Darren said. "Let's honor both our traditions." They spoke their vows as darkness fell and the stars emerged. Darren pledged his strength, his protection, his unwavering loyalty. Krazga pledged the same, her voice ringing with conviction. They had no witnesses but the mountains and the sky, but it felt more real and binding than any ceremony in a church could have been. That night, they consummated their marriage in the bed they now shared, and it was tender and passionate and perfect. Afterward, lying in each other's arms, Darren traced the line of Krazga's jaw, marveling at how lucky he was. "I never thought I could have this," he said quietly. "I never thought I deserved it." "You deserve everything good in this world," Krazga replied, her fingers combing through his hair. "And I will spend my life making sure you know that. We're going to face so much opposition," he said, "so much hatred and fear. Yes, but we will face it together, and we are stronger together than any hate could be alone." He kissed her forehead. I love you too, my husband." The word sent a thrill through him. Husband. He was her husband, and she was his wife, and nothing anyone said or did could change that. Summer faded into autumn, and their life together deepened. They fell into a comfortable domestic rhythm that felt both new and ancient. They worked side by side during the day, hunted and gathered and prepared for the coming winter. In the evenings, they read to each other from Darren's small collection of books, or they talked, or simply sat in comfortable silence. Krazga began teaching Darren some of the orcish language, and he proved an eager student. She laughed at his pronunciation at first, but he improved steadily. In turn, he taught her to read better, and they worked through his books together, her delight in the stories warming his heart. They made love frequently, exploring each other with curiosity and passion. Darren learned what pleased her, the spots that made her gasp and arch into his touch. She learned his preferences too, and they developed a physical language as rich as their verbal one. As autumn progressed, Krazga began to show signs that made Darren's heart skip with hope and terror in equal measure. She was tired more often. Certain smells that had never bothered her before made her nauseated, and she missed her monthly cycle. "I think I am with child," she said one morning, her hand resting on her still flat belly. "It is early, but I feel different, changed." Darren pulled her into his arms, emotions overwhelming him. Joy fierce and bright, fear sharp and cold, hope fragile and beautiful. "Are you happy?" he asked, needing to know. "Terrified," she admitted. "But yes, happy. Are you?" "So happy I can barely breathe," he said honestly. "And so scared I might throw up." She laughed, the sound slightly watery. "That makes two of us then." They held each other for a long time, contemplating this new development. A child. Their child. Half human, half orc. What would that mean? What would their child face growing up caught between two worlds? Would they be rejected by both, or could they somehow be a bridge? "We will protect them," Krazga said, as if reading his thoughts. "Whatever comes, we will keep them safe and teach them to be strong." "We will teach them to be kind too," Darren added. "Strong and kind like their mother, and brave and patient like their father." Over the following months, as Krazga's belly grew, they prepared. They made a cradle from smoothed wood. They gathered soft furs for swaddling. They laid in extra supplies, knowing the birth would be challenging and the recovery period difficult. Krazga consulted her extensive knowledge of healing herbs, preparing mixtures that would help with the birth and after. Winter arrived again, completing the circle of seasons. Darren thought back to that first night when he'd stumbled frozen and desperate to this door. So much had changed. He was no longer alone, no longer adrift. He had a wife, soon to be a child, and a purpose that went beyond mere survival. The baby came during a snowstorm in deep winter, as if following tradition. Krazga labored for many hours, and Darren stayed by her side, offering what comfort and help he could. He'd never felt more helpless or more in awe. When the baby finally emerged, squalling and red-faced, Darren's hands shook as he helped clean the tiny form and wrap it in warm blankets. "A girl," Krazga said breathlessly, reaching for her daughter. "We have a daughter." The baby had skin that was lighter than Krazga's but still carried a greenish tint. She had tiny tusks, barely visible bumps on her lower jaw. Her eyes, when they opened, were hazel, somewhere between Darren's brown and Krazga's gold. She was perfect. "What should we name her?" Darren asked, unable to look away from his daughter's face. "In orc tradition, the mother names the daughter," Krazga said, "but I would hear your thoughts." They discussed it as the baby nursed, considering names from both cultures. Finally, Krazga smiled. "Mara," she said. "It means strength in the old tongue, but it is close enough to human names that she will not stand out too much in your world." "Mara Gaines," Darren tested. "It's perfect." "She's perfect." Those first weeks with Mara were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. The baby demanded constant attention, nursing and crying and needing to be held. But when she slept, tiny and warm against Darren's chest, or when she looked up at him with those curious hazel eyes, his heart felt so full he thought it might burst. Krazga recovered well from the birth, her orcish constitution giving her strength. She was a natural mother, patient and loving but firm when needed. Watching her with their daughter, singing old orcish lullabies or simply cradling her close, Darren fell in love with her all over again. As winter gave way to spring and Mara grew, they faced a new set of questions. They couldn't hide in the mountains forever. Eventually, they would need supplies they couldn't make or grow themselves. Eventually, they would need to face the human world again, this time with their daughter. "We should go to the trading post soon," Darren said one evening, "before summer, while Mara is still small enough to carry easily." Krazga nodded, though tension lined her face. "They will see her, see what she is. Half-breed, they will call her. Abomination." "Let them call her what they want," Darren said fiercely. "She's our daughter and she's beautiful and perfect. Anyone who has a problem with that can answer to me." "To us," Krazga corrected. "They will answer to both of us." They made the journey to the trading post on a clear spring day, Mara secured in a sling against Darren's chest. As they approached, Darren felt his stomach clench with anxiety. This would be the test. This would show them what they really faced. The reaction was immediate. People stopped and stared. Conversations died. Sarah was the first to approach, her eyes going straight to the baby. "Oh my," she breathed. "Is that—" "Our daughter," Darren said firmly. "Mara. She's 4 months old." Sarah looked at Krazga, then back to Darren, then to the baby. Slowly, a smile spread across her face. "She's beautiful. May I?" Hesitantly, Darren let Sarah look closer. She cooed at Mara, who blinked up at her with wide eyes. "She has your nose," Sarah said to Darren. "And her mother's eyes. What a lovely combination." "Sarah," Marcus's voice was sharp as he approached. "Step away from there." "From what?" "From a baby." Sarah turned to her husband with unexpected steel in her voice. "Don't be ridiculous, Marcus. That's not just a baby, it's a—" Marcus struggled for words. "It's not natural." Krazga said quietly, dangerously. "She is not in it. She is our daughter. And she is as natural as any child born of love." A crowd was gathering now. Dutch the blacksmith was there, his face twisted with disgust. Several trappers and hunters. A few travelers passing through. Darren could feel the hostility radiating from them, could see the judgment in their eyes. "You've gone too far, Gaines," Dutch said. "Living with an orc was bad enough, but breeding with one, creating that thing. You're not welcome here anymore." "Then I'll trade elsewhere," Darren said evenly, though his hands were shaking with suppressed rage. "There are other posts, other settlements. We don't need your approval." "You won't find better welcome anywhere else," Dutch said with cruel satisfaction. "No one wants race traders and their mongrel spawn." Darren was moving before he consciously decided to, handing Mara to Krazga and stepping forward with his fist cocked. But Krazga's hand on his arm stopped him. "No," she said softly. "He is not worth it, and Mara should not see her father fight." Darren stood down, though every muscle in his body was screaming for violence. Krazga was right. They had to be better than the hate. "We'll trade quickly and be gone," he said to Marcus. "I have coins and you have supplies. That's all that needs to happen here." Marcus looked between them, conflict clear on his face. Finally, he nodded. "Quick trade, in and out, and after this you find somewhere else to do business." They conducted their transactions in heavy silence, the crowd watching their every move. Only Sarah offered any kindness, slipping a small stuffed toy into their pack when she thought no one was looking. When they left, Darren didn't look back. They walked in silence for a long time before Krazga spoke. "I am sorry," she said quietly. "Sorry that you must face such hatred because of me, because of what we created together." "Don't," Darren said fiercely. "Don't apologize for the best thing that ever happened to me. I knew what we'd face. I chose it anyway, and I'd choose it again 1,000 times over." "You are very certain of that now," Krazga said. But years from now, when Mara is older and must face that same hatred, when she asks why her father chose to make her life so hard, will you still be certain? Darren stopped walking and turned to face his wife. Krazga, listen to me. I don't regret a single moment. Not staying with you, not marrying you, not having Mara. The world is wrong, not us. The hatred is the problem, not our love, and Mara will grow up knowing that. She'll grow up strong and proud and aware that she is wanted and cherished. She'll grow up better than them, better than their small-minded prejudice, because she'll have us. Tears tracked down Krazga's cheeks. You always know what to say. I only speak the truth. He wiped her tears gently. We're a family. Nothing they say or do can change that. And families face things together. They returned to their mountain home, and life continued. Mara grew quickly, becoming more alert and active with each passing week. She laughed easily and rarely cried, as if she'd inherited her mother's strength and her father's easy nature. Darren and Krazga taught her about both her heritages, singing her songs in Common and Orcish, telling her stories from both cultures. As spring turned to summer, they received an unexpected visitor. Darren was working in the garden while Krazga watched Mara when he heard footsteps on the path. His hand went to his knife, but he relaxed when he saw it was Sarah from the trading post, looking tired and nervous. "Sarah, what are you doing here? I needed to speak with you," she said, glancing around as if worried she'd been followed. Away from the post, away from listening ears. Krazga emerged from the cabin, Mara on her hip. Sarah's face softened when she saw the baby. "She's gotten so big," she said. "May I hold her?" Krazga hesitated, then carefully handed Mara over. Sarah cradled the baby with practiced ease, and Mara gurgled happily, grabbing at Sarah's hair. "I came to warn you," Sarah said, keeping her voice low, "and to apologize for how you were treated. What Marcus and the others said was wrong." "We appreciate that," Darren said carefully, "but I'm guessing there's more." "Yes, Dutch has been stirring up trouble. Talking about how your presence is an insult to all decent humans. He's got a few of the younger men worked up, talking about teaching you a lesson." Sarah looked between them seriously. "I don't think they'll come up here soon. The mountains scare them. But eventually, if Dutch keeps pushing, someone might do something stupid. I wanted you to know, to be careful." Darren felt cold dread settle in his stomach. He'd known there would be opposition, but the idea of organized violence was something else entirely. "Thank you for warning us," Krazga said. "It was a risk for you to come here." "It was the right thing to do." Sarah handed Mara back to her mother. "For what it's worth, I think what you two have is beautiful. Love is rare enough in this world. The fact that you found it across such a divide makes it even more precious." She smiled sadly. "I hope someday the world catches up to you. Until then, watch your backs." She left before they could say more, disappearing back down the mountain path. Darren and Krazga looked at each other, the same thought written clearly on both their faces. They needed to be ready. Over the next weeks, they prepared. Darren set traps and alarms along the paths leading to their home, nothing lethal but enough to give warning if anyone approached. Krazga fashioned better weapons, sharpening blades and making sure their bow and arrows were in perfect condition. They created a hidden cache of supplies in the woods in case they needed to flee quickly, and they waited. The attack came on a hot summer night. Darren woke to the sound of their alarm traps being triggered, the subtle clattering of disturbed stones. He was on his feet instantly, reaching for his weapons. "Krazga," he whispered urgently. "Someone's coming." She was awake immediately, moving to the cradle where Mara slept. "How many?" "Don't know. Multiple traps triggered." They could hear voices now, low and angry, getting closer. Darren moved to the window and carefully looked out. In the moonlight, he could see shapes moving. 5 men, maybe 6, carrying torches and weapons. He recognized Dutch's massive silhouette leading them. "They are here to burn us out," Krazga said grimly, joining him at the window with Mara held protectively against her chest. "Or worse." "We need to get you and Mara out of here," Darren said. "There's too many of them." "I will not run from them. This is our home. Our home doesn't matter if you're dead." Darren gripped her shoulders. "Please, Krazga, take Mara and go to the cache point. I'll hold them off, give you time. I will not leave you to face them alone. You have to, for Mara, please." He saw the conflict in her eyes, the desperate desire to fight warring with her instinct to protect their daughter. Finally, painfully, she nodded. "Do not die," she commanded fiercely. "You hear me? Do not die and leave us alone. I'll do my best." He kissed her hard, then kissed Mara's forehead. "Go. Now." Krazga slipped out the back way, moving silently into the forest with their daughter. Darren waited until he was sure she was clear, then stepped out the front door of the cabin to face the mob. They froze when they saw him, clearly not expecting him to come out willingly. Dutch stepped forward, his torch held high. "Gaines, step aside and let us do what needs doing." "And what's that, Dutch? Burning down my home, murdering my family." Darren kept his voice steady, his hand on his knife. "That's not justice, that's just cruelty." "It's cleansing," another man said, one of the younger trappers. "Removing corruption before it spreads." "My wife and daughter aren't corruption, they're people. Good people. Better than you lot, apparently." "She's an orc," Dutch spat. "And that thing you made with her is an abomination. The gods themselves spit on such unions." "Funny, I don't hear any gods speaking. I just hear scared men trying to justify violence because they're too cowardly to face their own prejudice." Dutch's face twisted with rage. "Last chance, Gaines. Walk away. Leave the orc and the mongrel behind. Return to your own kind. We'll let you live if you do." "No." The refusal was simple, absolute. Darren squared his shoulders, ready to fight, ready to die if necessary to give Krazga and Mara more time to escape. The mob started forward, weapons raised. Darren drew his knife, knowing it was hopeless but refusing to go down without a fight. Then an arrow thudded into the ground at Dutch's feet. Everyone froze. From the shadows beyond the torchlight, Krazga stepped forward. She had her bow in hand, another arrow already nocked, aimed directly at Dutch's chest. Mara was no longer with her, hidden somewhere safe. "You should have kept walking," Krazga said, her voice deadly calm. "You should have left us in peace, but you came to our home with fire and steel. So now you face the consequences." "You're one orc against 6 men," Dutch said, but his voice wavered. "I am one orc who has killed more men than you have known. I am trained for war from childhood. I can put an arrow through your eye before you take a single step. And unlike you, I am defending my home and my family. That makes me far more dangerous than you could imagine." Another figure emerged from the shadows behind Krazga. Then another. Darren's eyes widened in shock. 3 orcs, all warriors by the look of them, all armed and ready. One was a massive male with graying hair. The others were younger but equally formidable. "My father," Krazga said, gesturing to the gray-haired orc. "And my brothers. When I left the clan, they were ordered to forget me. But blood calls to blood, and when I sent word that my family was in danger, they came." The gray-haired orc stepped forward, and Darren could see where Krazga got her features. The same golden eyes, the same proud bearing. "I am Durgash of the Stormtusk clan," he said in heavily accented common. "This is my daughter. That is my granddaughter. You threaten them, you threaten me. And I do not threaten easily." The humans looked between the orcs and Darren, clearly calculating their odds. 5 orcish warriors plus a determined human defending his home versus their mob. The mathematics suddenly didn't favor them. "This isn't over," Dutch said, but he was backing away. "We won't let you breed your filth in peace." "The next time you come," Durgash said calmly, "come ready to die, because we will be waiting." The mob retreated, their torch lights bobbing away down the mountain. Darren stood frozen, unable to quite process what had just happened. Krazga lowered her bow and turned to him, tears streaming down her face. "I sent word to my father weeks ago," she said quietly, "after Sarah's warning. I told him everything. What I had done, who I had married, about Mara. I expected nothing. I thought they would ignore me, that I was still outcast, but they came. They came for me." Durgash approached Darren, studying him with those familiar golden eyes. "You are the human who married my daughter." "Yes, sir, I am." Darren met his gaze steadily, refusing to show fear. "My daughter is strong, fierce, the best of our clan, though the elders were too stupid to see it." Durgash placed a huge hand on Darren's shoulder. "You must be strong also, to earn her respect, to make her happy." "Are you strong?" "I try to be," Darren said honestly. "I love her more than my own life. I'd die to protect her and our daughter." "Good, this is good." Durgash nodded slowly. "You may be human, but you have orc heart. This I respect." He paused, then added, "Where is my granddaughter?" "I would see her." Krazga retrieved Mara from where she'd hidden her in a hollow tree, wrapped in blankets and miraculously still sleeping. Durgash's face transformed when he saw the baby, becoming tender in a way that seemed impossible for such a fierce warrior. "Small," he said, carefully taking Mara in his massive hands. "So small, but she has storm-tusk eyes, and her mother's strength, I think. Yes, she will be mighty." Krazga's brothers crowded around, examining their niece with similar fascination. They spoke in rapid Orcish, and though Darren could only catch bits of it, he heard warmth and acceptance in their tones. That night, they all crowded into the cabin, which suddenly felt very small. Durgash explained that he had argued with the clan elders for weeks after receiving Krazga's message. Eventually, he declared that blood mattered more than prejudice, and he'd brought those of his sons who agreed with him. The clan was split now, some siding with Durgash's view that Krazga had shown true courage, others maintaining she was still outcast for her mercy to humans. "It does not matter what the clan thinks," Durgash said. "You are my daughter, you will always be my daughter, and this," he gestured to Darren and Mara, "this is your family, so it is my family also. We will protect you." "The humans will not stop," one of Krazga's brothers said. "Tonight they were afraid, but they will return with more men, more weapons." "Then we build better defenses," Darren said. "We prepare for the worst and hope for the best," or, Durgash said thoughtfully, "we find another way." They talked long into the night, planning and strategizing. By dawn, they had the outline of a plan that was either brilliant or insane, possibly both. They would establish a true settlement in the high country. Not just a single cabin, but a small community where orcs and humans who wanted peace could live together. It would be defensible, sustainable, and most importantly, it would serve as proof that their two races could coexist. Durgash knew of other orcs who'd become disillusioned with the constant warfare. Darren knew humans who were tired of hatred and fear. Together, they could build something new. It would take time, it would be dangerous, but it might just work. Over the following months, the plan took shape. Durgash and his sons returned to orc territories, carefully spreading word about the settlement. Darren made cautious contact with a few humans he thought might be sympathetic, including Sarah, who proved invaluable in identifying others who might be interested in a different way of living. Slowly, people began to arrive. A pair of young orcs who'd fallen in love, but been rejected by their clans for wanting a peaceful life. A human widow with 2 children, fleeing an abusive brother-in-law. An old orc healer who'd grown tired of tending war wounds. a human trapper who'd lost everything in the campaigns and wanted to rebuild somewhere new. Each arrival brought challenges. Old prejudices died hard, and there were fights and misunderstandings. But Darren and Krazga stood at the center of it all, living proof that cooperation was possible. Their marriage, their daughter, their obvious love for each other became a kind of beacon. They expanded the settlement carefully, building new cabins and communal spaces. They established rules that applied to everyone, regardless of race. Violence was not tolerated. Everyone contributed to the common good. Children were protected and valued above all else. Mara grew into a bright, curious toddler, speaking both common and orcish with equal ease. She played with both human and orc children without seeing any difference between them. She was, in many ways, the future they were all fighting for. Not everyone approved, of course. There were still humans who saw them as traitors and orcs who saw them as weak. The trading post made it clear they were not welcome. Dutch and his supporters made occasional attempts to harass them, though the settlement's defenses and the presence of Durgash's warriors kept them at bay. But slowly, grudgingly, they earned a kind of respect. Their settlement prospered while others struggled. Their crops were abundant. Their hunting was successful. They had healers and craftspeople and knowledge shared freely. Word spread of the strange place in the mountains where humans and orcs lived in peace, and while many dismissed it as impossible, others grew curious. 2 years after Mara's birth, a delegation arrived from a human town to the east. They were facing a harsh winter and needed help. Darren met with them, and despite their obvious discomfort at dealing with orcs, negotiations were successful. The settlement provided food and supplies in exchange for tools and other goods they couldn't make themselves. It was a small step, but an important one. More trade agreements followed. Then, a peace agreement with a nearby orc clan, facilitated by Durgash's mediation. Slowly, cautiously, the settlement became a kind of neutral ground where humans and orcs could interact without violence. It wasn't perfect. There were still incidents, still prejudice, still people on both sides who wanted nothing more than to see the experiment fail. But it endured and it grew, and it proved that another way was possible. 5 years after Darren first stumbled to Krazga's door, they stood together on a hillside, watching the settlement below. It had grown to nearly 50 people now, a mixture of races and backgrounds. Children played in the commons while adults worked at various tasks. Smoke rose from chimneys, and the sound of conversation and laughter drifted up to them. Mara was off with a group of other children, her distinctive appearance no longer unusual here. They'd recently learned that Krazga was pregnant again, and the knowledge filled them both with joy and anticipation. "Did you ever imagine this?" Darren asked, taking Krazga's hand. "When you first let that half-frozen human into your cabin?" "No," Krazga admitted. "I thought I would spend my life alone. I thought perhaps that was my punishment for saving those human children. But instead, it was my reward. You were my reward." "I was the lucky one," Darren said. "I was dying in more ways than one, and you saved me. Gave me a reason to live, to fight, to build. Everything good in my life came from that moment when you opened your door." "We saved each other," Krazga corrected. "We built this together, and we will continue to build it for our children and their children, a place where race does not matter. Where love is valued above hate, where peace is possible." "It's a good dream," Darren said. "It is more than a dream now, it is real. We made it real." She leaned against him and he wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. "There is much work still to do, much healing needed. But we have already done the impossible. The rest is just details." He laughed at that, this fierce orc woman who treated creating peace between warring races as mere details. "I love you, Krazga of the Stormtusk clan." And I love you, Darren Gaines, my husband, the father of my children, the builder of dreams. They stood there as the sun set, watching their community, their family, their future. It had started with a simple act of mercy, one orc woman opening her door to a dying human. From that small seed, something beautiful had grown, something that would endure. Behind them, Mara's laugh rang out, clear and joyful. She came running up the hill, her mixed features bright with happiness. "Mama, Papa, come quick. The new baby goats were born and they are so cute, and can I name one, please?" Darren and Krazga exchanged amused glances, then followed their daughter back down to the settlement. To home. To the life they'd built together against all odds. The world was still full of hatred and prejudice. The roads ahead were still difficult and dangerous. But here in this place at this moment there was peace. There was love. There was hope. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.